Hello, my name is Mike. This is a bike. Now, you may have seen in the last couple of episodes, I kind of pointed to this and really didn't talk too much about it. Well, we're going to change all that because, well, this episode is about this bike. This is a Victory V92 SC or Sport Cruiser that I picked up recently for a very good price because, well, it's been sitting a long time, hasn't run in a long time. Well, we're going to try and get this bike fired up in this episode. A couple of things I noticed on it. I mean, I haven't really looked it over real closely, but one of the things I noticed is it's got a power commander. That makes it faster. Needs a battery before we can do anything. It's got a different exhaust. This is not the factory exhaust. And it's got leaking fork seals. You can see the obligatory towel wrapped around the forks, which means that fork is fixed, so we can ignore it for now. We'll focus more on getting it running and getting it rideable. Now, when I purchased this bike, I went and got it with my trailer, pushed it up on the trailer, and I went to unload my trailer, and you've seen in previous videos that I rolled off a ramp with places to put my feet with two other ramps, but without any front brakes. Well, it's a little sketchy. I was afraid I'd roll off and roll backwards into the fence or into the bushes or something. So before I could do anything, I had to fix the front brakes because I had no brakes whatsoever. Turns out I had a bad brake hose, so I got the wrong brake hose and made it fit. And it kind of looks dorky, but at least I was able to put fluid in it, bleed the brakes, and get it unloaded from the trailer. Once I got it off the trailer, I found it didn't really want to roll very well for some reason. So either the belt is binding or the rear brakes are dragging or something like that. So it's got issues. My kind of bike. Hey, remember, it was cheap. And that's what matters. Anyway, we'll take a closer look at this bike. We'll throw a battery in it and we'll see what it does. Will we get it to start? So stick around. Somewhere in a dusty, dirty back alley in western Arizona, not far from historic Route 66, is an old fart trying to cram a square peg into a round hole. He'll work on anything, just as long as it's got at least two cool wheels. So let's take a quick walk around this bike. As I mentioned before, the fork seals, that's a pretty common problem on these, but we'll ignore those. I did get a brake line on it, and actually I could probably leave this on here even though it's not really the right one. I think if I uncurlicue it, it might be okay. As long as I got a brake lever, I'm happy with that. The bike's actually not in bad shape. It's got one little scratch in the tank, but overall the paint's okay. I've got the side covers. We'll be stuffing a battery in it here in a minute. The other thing I noticed on this bike is that it has not had the transmission upgrade done. For those of you that are familiar with the Victory V92 series bikes, the first 3 years or so, they did have transmission issues and there was a way to upgrade them. I did a video on that upgrade. And in fact, I have an engine sitting on my bench that has that upgraded transmission kit put in it. This one has not had it done yet, and I can tell at a glance because, well, there is no speed sensor riding on this rear belt sprocket back here, which there would be if the transmission upgrade had been completed. Instead, it's relying on a signal from the original sensor, which is, well, up here on the top. You can't really see it from here. So I don't know what kind of condition this transmission is in. We won't know until we get it put together and get it running. It may be perfectly fine, or it may be what that binding is I was feeling that will not allow it to roll very well. it could have a lunch tranny. So we'll get the engine running, and then we'll check and see the status of the transmission. And the nice thing is, if it needs a transmission, well, heck, I got that whole rebuilt engine sitting on my bench. I can just stuff it in here and we'll be good to go. So let me grab a battery and we'll put it in and see what happens. Alrighty, let's get this that tray replaced. Looks like a fairly new battery. I'll probably put it on a charger and see if it comes back around, but I'm not holding my breath. That's for sure. So, there we go. Mr. Bat Tray. Into the battery tray. Bat tray? Alright. Are you kidding me? Battery. Alright. Here we go. There it went. Alrighty. Round 2. Ooh, I hear buzzing sound from the instrument panel or the gauge cluster. When you first power these up, they usually make a little buzzing sound. Because we have power. Now, before I did all this, I did pull the gas cap off and took a little whiff of the fumes in the gas tank, and, well, much to my surprise, it didn't smell like varnish, which I fully expected it to. It smelled like gasoline, so if the fuel pump does come on, we may actually get it to start. Alright, I have a neutral light. Oh, I don't have a clutch cable though. Do not hear a buzz from the fuel pump. Alright, so right off the bat, I think we're going to need a fuel pump. And that's down here underneath the shock. This plate has to come off. The shock can be removed and you can get to the pump. Or you can take one of these big heavy side plates off. Either way, you're taking, stuff apart. So that'll be our next step. Before I put a fuel pump in it, I'm just going to see if I can get it to pop. I'm going to shoot a little vapor into the old intake here. Hopefully it'll be enough to do something. Well, that's a good sign. That indicates that the ignition system is working. Okay. One fuel pump coming up. The fuel pump on these bikes, it's mounted right down inside the frame rails. I've taken the shock out, and it looks like somebody's replaced it. This is not the factory pump. And then there's the wire terminals down there. We'll get a test light on it, and we'll see if that pump's getting any power to begin with. Alright, I've got my test light connected to the hot side of the fuel pump, and then I have it grounded directly to the negative side of the battery. When I turn the key on, it should give it a prime. I should see the test light come on. Nothing. So, for whatever reason, it's not sending a prime signal. Now I did check my switch. My kill switch is on. But for whatever reason, we're not getting a prime signal to that pump. Or my test light is bad. That could be. Now, one of my philosophies is, before you take anything apart, always check your fuses, which of course I completely ignored. So this 10 amp fuse, we see the test light light up. Okay, this 15 amp fuse, hot on one side, but dead on the other. So this fuse is bad. If I had to check these fuses, well, I wouldn't have torn all this apart. However, turns out it's a good thing I did tear all this apart, because while looking at that rear shock, I don't know if you guys saw it earlier, but you'll notice all the wires are all wet with oil. And that's because the rear shock, just like every other Victory V92 I've ever owned, is leaking. Every one. So I'm going to go ahead and put a fuse in it, see if our pump works, and if it does, yay. And then we're going to get a shock ordered before I put it all back together. All right, we've replaced the fuse. I have a feeling it's going to need a pump anyway. Why would the fuse blow? Key on. All right, pump energized that time. You can see it move. And we can hear it humming. All right, so I'll go ahead and reconnect the fuel line, and we'll see if we can get her to start. All right, I've reoriented the fuel pump so that the terminal wasn't touching ground. That's why the fuse was blowing. We should be able to start it now. I heard it prime. Sure idles high, doesn't it? Well, the reason it's idling so high is because the hot idle cable is jacked up. I'm going to have to pull the tank off to get to that cable and adjust it properly. And while we're at it, I'm going to show you guys a way to make your intake breathe better. We're going to eliminate what we call a coffin filter. We're going to cut it out of there because it can't be easily removed, and we're going to replace it with something called a cone filter, which has much more surface area the engine can breathe better. So I'll show you guys that one as well. Anyway, we'll get that done. We'll order a rear shock for it, and we'll have ourselves a cruiser. Now, one of the things Victory did right on the early bikes was they made it very easy to remove the tank. You've got a couple of bolts up at the front, got a couple of bolts here. To disconnect the fuel line, well, they have a quick disconnect. You just push the button here, and you can separate the top piece from the bottom piece. Problem is, with age, it gets very brittle, and then they break. So this T is very hard to find. In fact, I don't believe it's available anymore. I did see somebody found some, but they wanted an arm and 3 legs for them. You can get just the fittings, like these guys here, on eBay. They're still available. They're around 30 bucks. The difference is now you've got to put a T in for the male half. And what I typically do is I just go to the auto parts store on the help rack, and you can get a T like this, a vacuum T or fuel T, and you can splice it in, and then you can replace that quick disconnect fitting, and you still have the nice feature. It's got a shut-off valve built right into it, so that when it's disconnected, this little valve closes, and the fuel doesn't run out of your tank. So you can take the tank off, even if it's full, and not make a gigantically huge, flammable mess. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to install these real fast so that we can manipulate the tank. The only reason there's no fuel flowing out now is, well, it's empty. Now, one of the things I like to do is I like to cut a little bit off of both ends. Thereby, when I connect them together with a hose, I'm making it as short as possible because, well, you don't have a whole lot of room over here. So you're going to want to make this junction here as short as possible. It'll still fit, but just barely. So you do want to trim it a little bit. Now the original female is a slightly larger diameter hose barb. You can usually tighten the clamp down enough to seal it. It's not going to leak. Remember, this part of the fuel system is not pressurized. This is just gravity fed from the gas tank. This is pre-pump. So what I've also done in the past, sometimes I'll cut a little piece of thin hose and make like a sleeve. You can do that, but usually just tightening the clamp down is good enough. And here we have the completed coupler. Works great, and you can still disconnect the tank without getting fuel all over the place like I did. And now for something completely different. So one of the things that you can do to improve the performance of your bike, one of the things I like to do to all my bikes, is to get rid of the coffin filter and install the 99 model year only cone filter. Coffin filter on the left in this picture and cone filter on the right. The coffin filter is easier to change the element because it just slides out. So you do have to take the tank off on the cone type filter. But the advantage is the cone filter element itself is much, much larger and allows a lot more air in. And in fact, Arnold Ness noticed this and he bought out a bunch of new old stock 99 cone type air filters, fitted them with the K&N element, and remarketed them as a high performance intake system for the Victory bikes. The cone type filter will fit any place that the coffin type filter came from originally. You can just simply replace them. The problem is getting the coffin filter out because, well, it's so large, it occupies the space between the engine and the frame, and one would have to drop the engine down out of the frame to get it out in one piece. If you look at the next picture here, you can see that the size of the filter element for the coffin filter is that little rectangle there towards the bottom, and the cone type filter is much larger, has a lot more surface area, and lets a lot more air in. It simply bolts in. What I've been doing on a lot of these bikes, if I don't happen to have a 99 air filter housing, is I can cut that coffin filter. It's got to get cut to take it out anyway, and we can modify it to accommodate a cone type filter so it can be used as a cone filter, still get that good airflow without you having to hunt down an obsolete part. Because remember, that was used in the 99 model year only. All right, in order to expedite things a bit, I've already removed the gas tank. Kind of covered that a little bit. I've got the quick disconnect that I showed you guys how to put together. There's also another one under the tank right here for the return line. Again, just you push a button, fitting comes out. You've got a wire harness connector here for the fuel tank sending unit, and then you also have a vent line from the tank. So once you've disconnected those, you take the 4 bolts out, you can remove the tank and gain access to, well, not much. This air filter housing kind of blocks your access to the throttle body. Now, there is a panel you can remove here. In fact, you'll have to remove that to get the bolts out that hold this coffin filter to the throttle body. You can clean the throttle body, but you can't really get to the linkages and the cables and the stuff you need to get to, which is one of the problems I have with this bike. My high-speed throttle cable is stuck on wide open throttle and it's just revving, so I've got to take this off anyway, and I'm not going to drop the engine out. So what we're going to do, and I know it's sacrilegious to some of you, we're going to cut this air filter housing in half. By cutting it in half, we can remove the 2 pieces, gain access to our throttle body, and then before we put the back half back on, we're going to convert it into a cone type filter. Now, for all you purists out there, and I'm kind of one, I like to keep these bikes pretty much stock. If I ever decide to go back to the coffin type, I've got a couple of spares laying around. I can always put it back on it if I need to keep the originality of the bike up, in case it becomes a collector's item or something. This is the factory filter element. It's kind of like a K&N. It's got the wire mesh and all. Don't know how good it is. And then K&N, for a while, made these available. I'll post the part number in the video so you guys can try to hunt them down. They are also discontinued, but you never know. One may crop up, and of course you'll probably want to use the K&N instead of the factory one. K&N has a good reputation for having good filtration and also good airflow. So we're going to make this work on this housing. And you have two sensors to deal with. You have an intake air temperature sensor right here, which on the earlier bikes was in a different location, so we're going to keep that. And then we also have a barometric pressure sensor. This tells the fuel injection system how dense the air is, so it knows how rich or lean to make it. So both those sensors are attached to this housing. If you happen to find one of the 99 housings, you're going to have to relocate the intake air temperature because it's in a different place. But either way, we'll go ahead and disconnect those because, well, when we take this out of here, we're going to need to. Now, got a couple of snorkels in here. Look, somebody's even labeled them. Somebody's had this thing apart. Another snorkel here. Come here, snorkel. And like I said, you can clean the throttle body, but you really can't get to much else. You can get to the cables a little bit right there. If you want to get to the entire thing, well, you've got to take this out. And since we're going to do the conversion, we're going to take this entire assembly out by cutting it. All right. You may have seen the air cleaner housing I put on the Jackpot. If you followed that video, that was one of the 99s. So because I don't have another one, we're going to make this one work. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut it here, and then this piece can be easily removed. And once this is out of the way, this whole front piece can be removed. And we're just going to discard the front piece. We don't really need it. When we go to cut it, we want to make sure we have enough material here to mount the cone type filter to. So basically, I kind of draw an invisible dotted line with my calibrated eyeball right at the widest point here. And we're just going to cut it right through here. Now, you could try to get in there with a sawzall or a hacksaw. I found the easiest way to deal with plastic is, well, you know, if you get something hot, you can cut through it like a hot knife through butter. That's a clue. Well, it's not butter, it's plastic. So, give me my tools. So what we're going to do is, we're going to use the old Burns-O-Matic here. We're going to heat up a butter knife that I have custom modified for cutting things. And if we need to get into some tighter areas, we may even use this scraper and heat it up as well. One of the things you got to keep in mind, if you're using one of these, this is an open flame. We also have fuel line and another fuel line over here. So, you know, guys, take the necessary safety precautions. Don't do like I do and ignite things. Okay, we want to try to keep from burning the bike to the ground. So when you're heating this up, you just, get way, way over here somewhere. Do your heating and then do your slicing. So, and it doesn't have to be precise because before we go to modify it to put a filter on it, we're going to kind of cut it a little bit more. And, it's better to have too much than too little because we can always trim more of it off. We're going to have to trim it to make it work anyway. So I'll show you all that as well. Get it nice and red hot. We'll just slice right in here. Oh yeah, just separates it nicely. Go, Mr. Hot Knife, go. To adapt the cone filter to the cutoff portion of the coffin type filter, first of all, we're going to discard the front piece that we cut off. We already pulled it out. We only need the back half, but we do need to create an adapter plate. I just simply used a piece of old flashing, and you can use the housing as a template, and you can use the cone filter as a template to create the piece that goes in between. Just simply outline them and make marks where the holes need to be drilled for the cone filter. You will also have to create holes in the corners to attach that plate to the plastic housing. Now, a lot of times the screws don't have very good bite because it's pretty thin plastic. And you also want to make sure that it's airtight. So you also want to make sure you run a good bead of RTV at the joining surfaces between the plastic housing and the adapter plate that you make. But it's really pretty straightforward and pretty simple if you have any kind of fabrication skills. The end result is a piece that can easily be bolted back to the throttle body and can even be removed from underneath the gas tank without removing the gas tank if you do it properly. And here we have the finished unit. Now you might say, and rightly so, what a hacked up piece of hodgepodgery butchery is that? I mean, that is butchery by definition of the 7th degree. And I would say to you, well, the alternative is trying to find an original 99 housing online is going to be difficult and expensive. This is a cheap alternative. And remember, I'm a cheapskate. And here's the thing. If you need to work on your throttle body, you got to be able to remove the air filter housing. If any of you have attempted to replace the throttle position sensor on one of these with the stock coffin type air filter on there, well, you'll be thankful I showed you this little trick, if you will, this form of butchery. If you do happen to find one online, well, they're going to be expensive. So what I can do is put this one on, and then if an actual Polaris type 99 model year cone filter becomes available, I can always purchase it and install it later. Remaining is to take this old girl for a spin, see how the engine runs, see how the tranny works, and we'll find out if our little invested time was well worth it. My problem is, well, I got to lift up a car to get it out of here. The hoist makes for a really good theft deterrent device for this. Anyway, let's go for a little ride. No neutral light. Something tells me, oh, we have classic transmission issues, guys. Well, that's going to have to do it for this episode. Clutch feels a little funky, and I kicked it into gear, nothing happens. So in the next episode, we're going to turn to that primary cover and determine if we actually have a bad trans or not. Again, this is one of the earlier bikes. This one has not yet had the upgrade, so odds are he's going to need a tranny overhaul. So thanks for watching. Come on back for the next episode.